My name is Isabella Green. I'm 30th Commander in the U.S. Navy Cyber Command. But none of that mattered when I pulled into my hometown, 6 years away, 6 years of silence, and not a single call from them. Now, I'm back. Not because I missed anyone, not because I needed comfort. I came back because the mission demanded it. The roads felt smaller than I remembered, the pine trees thicker, shadows longer. As I drove past the old gas station, still blinking its ancient neon sign, I saw a group of kids on bikes. That used to be me once. Feet off the pedals, hair catching the wind, no idea what the world was really like. Back then, I thought escaping meant leaving. Now I know, real escape is owning the past on your terms. No one came to pick me up from the airport. No welcome home, no hug, no warm casserole, no half-hearted banner. I landed quietly, rented a car, and drove myself the last 80 miles in the dark. Pulling into the driveway of my childhood home, the house looked exactly the same. Even the porch light still flickered when it turned on. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at it. A fortress of memories. Some good, most indifferent. I took a breath and stepped out. The front door creaked as I pushed it open. And there she was, my mother, standing in the hallway in a perfectly pressed cardigan and pearls, as if the 50s never ended. She raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Oh," she said, "you're still fixing computers for the Navy?" Not, "How are you?" Not, "We've missed you." Just that. I smiled back. Something like that. If only she knew. My mother has always had a way of reducing the extraordinary into something small enough to ignore. She once called my ROTC scholarship cute. When I deployed to Japan, she asked if I'd get any sightseeing in. My father? He just kept himself busy at the firm and signed birthday cards like he was approving a memo. And now, they were throwing a gala. A high society spectacle for Cornova Systems and a mysterious new federal partnership. My father, Mr. William Green, senior director and local icon, was finally about to break into national power. Big press, bigger contracts. What they didn't know? That mysterious federal partner was me. For the past 14 months, I'd led the Navy's Strategic Cyber Initiative, SCYSI, on a $950 million collaboration with Cornova. Encryption research, zero-day vulnerability containment, AI-piloted defense protocols, all highly classified, all with my fingerprints all over it. So no, I wasn't here to fix computers. I was here to test their systems in person, quietly, discreetly, and yes, undercover. The gala was the perfect opportunity. Not as a guest, though. I'd be in the control room, anonymous, quiet, watching every signal, every handshake, every careless slip. They thought I came home to visit, but I came home to change everything. That night I lay on my old twin bed, the one with the squeaky springs and faded posters on the wall. I could hear my parents downstairs, clinking glasses, planning table arrangements, completely unaware their daughter was about to put their precious Cornova deal under the sharpest microscope the Department of Defense could authorize. Part of me wanted to tell them, wanted to say, "Hey, I'm the reason this deal exists," but I didn't. Not yet. Not like this. They had to see who I really was. Not because I said so, but because the truth would walk in unannounced and undeniable. The next morning, my mother handed me a to-do list. Errands. Chores. Like I was still 19 and on spring break. I took the list, smiled, and nodded. Let her think I had nothing better to do. By noon, I was in a downtown cafe, laptop open, secure tunnel live, coordinating last-minute protocols with 2 teams on the East Coast. My contact at Cornova, who had never seen my face, sent a message confirming the access I needed for tonight. Meanwhile, my mother texted, "Pick up extra ice." I did. I played the part. At 6 p.m., the gala kicked off. The guests arrived in waves: senators, engineers, investors, even a few generals. I was already in the sub-level operations suite, headset on, scanning signal patterns and logging every device that walked through the front doors. Anything anomalous, anything that could compromise national security. This wasn't paranoia. This was protocol. And I'd written it. Upstairs, my father raised a glass and began his keynote speech. Downstairs, I intercepted a rogue signal bouncing through a foreign IP relay, flagged it, logged it, isolated it. At 6:47 p.m., a Cornova device failed a security test. I ordered a lockdown of its access to the internal network. Nobody upstairs noticed. The music played, the wine poured, the mission continued. That night, while they toasted to a future they thought they owned, I made sure they'd only get it if they played by the rules. Not because I was their daughter, because I was the one writing the rules now. Tomorrow they'd learn. Not from me, but from a formal federal briefing. Cornova would receive the partnership deal pending mandatory internal reforms, data integrity protocols, staff clearances, all recommended by one commander, IG. They'd search the name eventually. And maybe, just maybe, my father would pause, look at that name, and realize who it was that came home. Not the daughter he underestimated, not the girl they dismissed, but the woman who no longer needed their approval. Dinner that night tasted like ashes. Not because the roast was overdone. It was fine. Perfect, even in that overly curated way my mother insists on. Everything symmetrical, everything matching. The table set like a magazine spread. Napkin rings. Silver-plated servers. No detail out of place, except me. The spotlight belonged to Madison. "Can you believe it?" my mother beamed, lifting her wine glass with a proud gleam in her eyes. Head of PR at Cornova at just 28. They said they've never promoted someone that quickly. Madison gave her signature modest shrug, all smiles and perfect posture. "It's been a whirlwind," she said, like someone who knew exactly how to humble brag. "But I guess they saw something in me." My father chuckled. "Of course they did. You know how to speak their language. Power, image, strategy, not like all that back-end technical stuff." He waved a hand in my direction without even looking at me. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just cut another piece of chicken and nodded slightly. No one noticed. "Oh, Bella," my mother said suddenly, as if remembering I existed. "Are you still fixing computers for the Navy?" She said it with that same tone you'd use for someone who still works at the mall after high school. Her fork clinked gently against her plate as she waited for me to answer. I met her eyes for a beat, then smiled. "Yeah, something like that." She nodded, clearly satisfied with the non-answer. Then she turned right back to Madison. "I swear, the way you handled that press leak last quarter? Genius. The board is obsessed with you." My father laughed. "You always had the shine, Mads. Natural charisma. You know how to play the game. Not like your sister." Then he looked at me, finally. "You always had potential, Bella. Shame you chose bureaucracy over brilliance." There it was. The hit, delivered with a smirk and a sip of wine. I could have said 1,000 things in that moment. I could have told them that just last week, I was in a classified meeting with the Joint Chiefs, briefing them on a cyber threat they didn't even know existed. I could have told them that the bureaucracy they mocked had a $950 million tech deal balanced on the edge of my judgment. But I said nothing, because some wars aren't worth fighting until you're ready to win them in public. So I listened. I let them ramble on about Madison's network, about how she was positioning herself perfectly in the company. I let my mother talk about Madison's media sense, how she was born for big things. Funny. No one mentioned that the biggest announcement of Cornova's future wasn't coming from PR. It was coming from me. Tomorrow morning, the CEO of Cornova would take the stage in front of all their executives, investors, and press. He'd clear his throat. He'd smile at the cameras. And then he'd say the words no one at that table tonight could ever imagine. This strategic partnership has been made possible under the leadership of Commander Isabella Green, U.S. Navy Cyber Command. I replayed it in my mind like a secret weapon still sheathed. My title, my name, their stunned silence. It almost made the dry chicken worth it. Honestly, Madison, my mother said, pouring more wine, if you keep this up, you could be VP by next year, or even CMO. Wouldn't that be something? Madison gave a polite giggle. Let's see what tomorrow brings. Oh, tomorrow. You have no idea. The irony was delicious. My sister had been prepping for the announcement all week, thinking the Cornova leadership was introducing some mysterious DoD liaison she'd eventually have to media manage. Little did she know the woman behind the scenes, running the entire mission, was the same one sitting silently across from her, enduring a slow, condescending dinner. They talked for another hour. I faded into the wallpaper. The quiet one. The girl who left home, never called, and now apparently fixed printers for a living. Fine. Let them write their own version of me. Let them pass the pen around and fill in the blanks with whatever made them feel superior. Because the real story, that was coming. In less than 12 hours, the script flips. No stage lights, no rehearsed applause. Just facts, titles, and clearance levels they couldn't begin to understand. When the CEO introduces me, it won't be as a tech rep. It won't be as someone's daughter. It will be as the commander of the most sensitive military tech operation Cornova has ever touched. Tomorrow, I stop being a shadow in this family. Tomorrow, I walk out of the dark, and they're going to have to squint. They see a woman who came home to eat roast chicken and dodge questions. What they don't see is the woman who's already pulled the strings behind the biggest military tech initiative of the decade. Funny how perception works, especially in families. But before this version of me, before the title, before the clearance level, before the silence at the dinner table, I was just a midshipman at the U.S. Naval Academy, Annapolis. A nobody with a high ponytail and sharper code than half my instructors. I didn't just graduate, I dominated. Top of my class, triple certified in cyber ops, and recruited straight into a program most cadets didn't even know existed. That's when things changed. My first real mission wasn't on a battlefield. It was in a data center buried deep under concrete, somewhere the world couldn't point to on a map. I was 24, still green, still naive enough to think the people above me had everything under control. They didn't. We intercepted a signal coming out of Eastern Europe, something subtle, clever. Not an attack, a rehearsal, a slow infiltration of backdoors into U.S. energy grids. If we hadn't caught it early, entire power systems could have collapsed. No lights, no heat, no explanation. I wasn't supposed to lead anything that day. I was just support. But when the lead analyst froze and the room filled with silence and panic, I stepped in, called the breach point, wrote the shutdown protocol, coordinated the counter-injection in under 6 minutes. The threat vanished like a ghost, and I got my first black file commendation. They offered me a choice: move into a standard analyst role, or go dark and join a program with no name and no guarantee of resurfacing. I didn't blink. I chose the shadows. Years passed, missions stacked. Most of them I can't talk about. Some I still have nightmares about. But every step I rose. Not with politics, not with favors, just skill and timing and a cold-blooded kind of clarity. That's what got me into the Quantum Defense Initiative. You haven't heard of it. Most people haven't. That's the point. It's the Pentagon's moonshot, a multi-agency operation to weaponize and defend against quantum-era threats. Think encryption that can't be broken and attacks that can wipe data off every device in a country simultaneously. Cornova was chosen as the civilian tech partner. Big move, huge contract, global stakes, and guess who they put in charge of strategic oversight? Me, Commander Isabella Green, U.S. Navy Cyber Command. Clearance level, Omega Black. Authority, full veto power on every Cornova system involved in QDI, including media channels, internal software, and prototype architecture. That means everything my father has built, everything my sister brags about? I can shut it down with one recommendation memo, but I haven't. Yet. Because power isn't about using the hammer. It's about letting them build the house, knowing you hold the fuse box. There's a moment people in command talk about, a turning point, when you stop waiting for permission, when you stop asking to be seen, when you realize that being underestimated is just another kind of cover. I hit that moment last year. The moment I stopped caring about proving myself to anyone in a dinner room. I started playing for something bigger. Let them talk. Let my mother look past me like I'm a piece of the wallpaper. Let my father joke that I chose bureaucracy over brilliance. Let Madison float through life with handshakes and hashtags and perfectly filtered success. Because the truth is this, while they were playing the game, I was building the board. Tomorrow morning, when the CEO of Cornova steps onto that podium, he won't be introducing another executive. He'll be introducing the woman who holds the key to their future funding, to their data systems, to their very survival in the post-quantum age. He'll say my name. He'll say my title. And every single person at that table tonight will hear it echo in their heads like a bomb going off in a quiet room. I don't need to gloat. I don't need revenge. I just need one moment of truth. And it's already locked in. You know what the wildest part is? They think they're in control. My father believes he's steering the company into a golden age. Madison thinks she's shaping the narrative. My mother? She thinks she raised a soldier who never quite fit in. But they're all playing checkers. And I'm already 5 moves into chess. I've reviewed every Cornova QD I report. I've redlined protocols that Madison's team leaked early to the media. I've flagged software my father signed off on that didn't pass security standards. None of it public. Not yet. I've let them run, hoping they'd earn the chance to stay in the game. But I won't hesitate if they cross the line. Not because I'm bitter, but because national security doesn't care who you're related to. Blood doesn't override mission. And titles? Real titles, commander, strategist, operative, aren't given at family dinners. They're earned in silence, in service, in sacrifice. So let them sleep peacefully tonight, dreaming of promotions and press conferences. Tomorrow, they wake up to the truth. And this time, I won't be invisible. There are moments that change the air in a room, moments that stop conversations mid-sentence, that steal breath from lungs and freeze time in place. Tonight was one of those moments. I stepped out of the black government SUV as the flashbulbs popped. Not in heels, not in a cocktail dress. I wore my Navy service dress uniform, buttons gleaming, the eagle and anchor pinned high on my collar, and the stripes on my sleeves speaking louder than words ever could. People turned. Whispers began. My heels echoed against the marble floor of the Cornova Grand Atrium, slow, deliberate, unbothered by the opulence surrounding me. The towering crystal chandelier, the velvet ropes, the champagne trays, the high-level guests in designer suits and gowns, all of it faded into the background. Because now they saw me, really saw me. A man in a headset tried to stop me, probably mistook me for a security detail or a lost dignitary. But then he caught my badge, saw the level, and stepped aside without a word, up the steps, through the corridor, into the ballroom. And there they were, my family. My father was near the front of the stage, shaking hands with some tech investors, talking like he always does, loud and certain, like he invented electricity. My mother stood by, sipping something expensive and nodding at names she probably couldn't remember. And Madison? Madison was on the edge of the spotlight, phone in hand, smiling with the kind of effort that screams, "Capture this now, validate me later." I saw the exact second they noticed me. First, it was Madison. Her smile flickered. She lowered her phone. Her eyes scanned my uniform, blinked, and then widened like a floodlight had just hit her. Next came my mother. She frowned, confused, tilted her head like I was an unfamiliar painting hung in the wrong gallery. Her lips parted, then closed. No words came. And then, my father. He turned just in time to see me walking straight toward the stage. Our eyes locked. His hand dropped mid-handshake. The glass of bourbon he was holding slipped and shattered against the polished floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I didn't flinch. Neither did Ethan Marlowe. He stepped up to the microphone just as the room fell quiet. The kind of silence that crackles with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm, confident, practiced. "Before we unveil the next phase of the Quantum Defense Initiative, there's someone I need to acknowledge. Someone without whom none of this would be happening." He turned toward me with a respectful nod. "Commander Isabella Green," he said, clear and strong. "Our military liaison and strategic partner, the backbone of this entire project, a brilliant mind, a fearless leader, and the reason Cornova is entering the future." There it was, gasps, murmurs, heads swiveling, phones dropping. And my father? He stood frozen, like a man suddenly waking up from a decade-long dream. Madison looked like the blood had drained from her face. Her grip tightened on her clutch. Her perfect little media-ready smile, gone. I stepped forward as Ethan extended his hand. We shook, cameras flashed, applause rose. Hesitant at first, then steady. This wasn't arrogance. This was truth. And I wore it like armor. "I know many of you weren't expecting that," Ethan continued, smiling slightly. "But surprises are part of innovation. And Commander Green has been behind every critical decision, quietly, efficiently, and with unmatched precision." He didn't need to say more. The room buzzed with realization. The Green daughter they'd dismissed, ignored, joked about fixing computers, she was the one Cornova reported to. I scanned the crowd, my eyes brushing past my family as if they were just another row of stunned spectators. And then I spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Marlowe," I said, voice steady. "Tonight marks a milestone, not just for Cornova or the Navy, but for the safety of our country's digital frontier. Quantum warfare is no longer theory. It's here, and our response must be smarter, faster, stronger." I paused. And it already is. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, and behind the applause and admiration, there was something else building, respect, the kind they never gave me at home. After the ceremony, people lined up to speak with me. Generals, CTOS, ambassadors, even 2 senators. I stayed professional. I gave short, sharp answers. I let my rank and record speak for itself. Meanwhile, my family stood at the edge of the room like extras in a movie they didn't realize I was starring in. Eventually, my father approached. Slowly. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come easily. "Commander," he said stiffly. "Not Isabella. Not sweetheart. Not even Bella. Just Commander." That alone was worth the last 6 years. "I didn't know," he continued, eyes flickering. "I had no idea that you were running this." I tilted my head slightly. "No one did." That was the point. He shifted awkwardly. "You've made quite a name for yourself." I nodded once. "It wasn't for the name." He looked like he wanted to say more. "Apologize, maybe. Take some credit, possibly." But the crowd moved again, pulling me back into the swirl of introductions and photo ops. I left him standing there, unsure of where he fit anymore. Madison didn't speak to me that night, not a word. Just a long, shaken stare from across the room. She'd spent months preparing press materials, social campaigns, and branding pitches for QDI. All without realizing the real story, the story that mattered, was never hers to control. And my mother? She said nothing either, just pursed her lips, took another sip of wine, and avoided my gaze. For once, I let them sit in silence, because the truth had arrived, and it didn't need my permission anymore. The daughter they underestimated had just become the woman they couldn't ignore. Tomorrow, the headlines would carry my name. The partnership would move forward. My decisions would shape the infrastructure of American defense. But tonight? Tonight I stood in full dress uniform, beneath golden chandeliers and $1,000 suits, and reclaimed every inch of ground I'd ever been told wasn't mine. And I didn't have to raise my voice to do it. The applause had barely faded when I stepped up to the podium again. This time, not as a guest of honor, but as the one holding the mic for the most important part of the evening, the live Q&A. Cornova had prepped for this. They'd rehearsed every slide, every pitch, every deflection. They expected a room full of polite questions and softball praises. What they didn't expect was me. "Commander Green," the moderator announced, "will now facilitate the Q&A and strategic review." The words landed like a brick. Half the room stiffened. A few executives adjusted their ties. Madison blinked rapidly, realizing, too late, that this wasn't going to be a ceremonial formality. I clicked the remote. The first presentation slide lit up the massive screen behind me. "Let's begin with Proposal 7A, I said, voice clear, calm. "Adaptive media interfacing." The lights dimmed slightly, and a few executives leaned in, eager to show off their work. I turned toward the presenting team. "You're proposing real-time data syncing between Cornova's internal platforms and media outlets. Is that correct?" A young man in a tailored suit nodded. "Yes, Commander. We believe this transparency model, spearheaded by our comms division, builds public trust." He glanced toward Madison, who smiled faintly, clearly recognizing her fingerprints all over it. "And who manages the filters on what goes out and when?" I asked. He hesitated. "Well, the comms team would. So essentially, the same PR department responsible for a recent internal leak would also curate outbound defense communications." Silence. Madison's smile vanished. I continued. "This proposal introduces significant vulnerability. You're asking us to give a civilian team real-time control over sensitive data flows during military exercises. That's not transparency. That's a national risk." I clicked to the next slide. A few gasps rippled through the audience. The board members, now fully awake, began whispering among themselves. No one stopped me. I moved on to Proposal 9C, then 12E, then a flagship AI diagnostic platform that had been touted as unhackable. It took me less than 5 minutes to point out 3 structural weaknesses, including a backdoor flaw that, if left untouched, could allow a foreign actor to ghost through the entire quantum firewall in under 40 seconds. I wasn't showing off. I was doing my job. But every time I spoke, I watched the pride drain from my father's face and the confidence melt from my sister's. The higher I stood, the smaller they became in their own empire. The board took notes. The CTO leaned in so close he almost knocked over his glass. At one point, even Ethan Marlowe stopped reviewing his agenda and just watched me. I finished my final slide. Any further questions? The room stayed silent. Then the CEO stood. Let's be clear, Ethan said, turning to face the crowd. This isn't just sharp analysis. This is national security intellect at its peak. Commander Green is not simply our liaison. She's a national asset. I didn't flinch, but I felt that one. Deep. The kind of recognition you spend years not asking for, then finally receive in the one room you never expected. Applause started again, slow, respectful, this time heavier. You could feel it wasn't just for the Navy. It was for me. As people stood and filtered out for dinner, small clusters formed, executives whispering, board members shaking hands, officers nodding, and in the middle of it all stood my mother. She had that familiar expression, equal parts confusion and forced grace. She approached slowly, glass of wine in hand like she was walking through a garden party instead of the aftermath of a corporate earthquake. Well, she said lightly, we've always said the Navy was a fine career. I looked at her, really looked at her. How easy it was for her to rewrite the past in one breath, to coat dismissal with politeness and pretend it never happened. But I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. Just tired of pretending it didn't matter. No, I said, calm and steady. You said it was a detour. She blinked. I smiled slightly. Turns out, it was the highway. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She said nothing more. Behind her, Madison hovered, wide-eyed, arms crossed, jaw tense. I caught her staring at the boardroom doors like she was calculating how quickly she could escape this entire evening. Madison, I said, and her eyes snapped to me. That PR pipeline you championed, it needs a complete restructure, not because it's bad PR, but because it was built for optics, not resilience. She opened her mouth, maybe to defend it, maybe to throw someone under the bus. But I raised a hand. I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here to protect you from mistakes you didn't know you were making. And I meant it. That's the difference between us. She wants to be seen. I want us to be safe. She looked down. For once, no argument came. I turned and walked away, past stunned execs, past my father's empty glass, past all the people who once thought I was invisible. I'd said everything that needed to be said. No shouting, no revenge speeches, just clarity, because the truth has gravity. And once it lands, you feel it in your bones. Later that evening, as the gala wound down and the music softened, Ethan Marlowe approached me again. Commander, he said quietly, they're going to talk about tonight for a long time. I looked out over the glittering room, now half empty and buzzing with aftershocks. Let them, I said. He nodded. We've never had anyone in your position call things like that so publicly. Maybe that's the problem, I replied. And I meant it. Tech giants and defense initiatives had danced too long in shadows of ego and assumption. It was time for something different, something sharper, something real. As I exited the building that night, moonlight glinting off my service bars, I knew one thing for sure. The girl who left this town 6 years ago was never meant to fit their frame. But the woman who came back? She broke it, and now they'll have to build a new one, with my name etched into the foundation. You'd think after everything, I'd be used to it by now. Being underestimated, second-guessed, shut out, talked down, and smiled at like I was background noise in my own story. But betrayal, real betrayal, still hits different, especially when it wears your last name. It started 2 days after the gala. I was in D.C., back in the ops room, finalizing encryption modules for Phase 3 of the quantum defense rollout. I wasn't expecting fanfare. I wasn't chasing headlines. I'd done what I came to do, protect the mission. And then the alert came through. Code raid on a media leak. At first it looked like a standard breach. Sensitive documents, half redacted, floating across a clickbait military watchdog site. But I knew instantly the data didn't come from the outside. The language in the memos, the format of the attachments, they were internal, deliberate, leaked by someone with access. It didn't take long to trace the breach. The IP trail was amateur, lazy even. Madison, her login, her work laptop, her credentials. I stared at the screen, letting the reality settle in. My sister, who just days ago stood silent while the world finally saw me, had tried to unravel everything behind my back. The memos painted Nova's military partnership as aggressively opaque, implied overreach by defense officials, questioned the legality of classified project oversight. All buzzwords, all poisoned to spark outrage, and she'd fed them to the press, to undercut me, to damage the credibility of the very deal she had once posed in front of for photos. But it didn't stop there. As I dug deeper, cross-referencing timestamps, digital signatures, secure comm logs, another file flagged for review. This one wasn't from Madison. It was from my father. A flagged message from 3 weeks ago, sent to the board's private Slack channel. Subject line: delay recommended, unclear oversight boundaries. His message read like a chess move, careful, dressed in professional language. But I knew what it really said. Slow the process, stall the launch. Let the military back off long enough for me to claim more ground. In plain terms, he tried to delay federal approval of the project, because full military integration would mean audits, protocols, oversight, and oversight meant one thing to men like my father: accountability. That would have jeopardized his shot at Nova's executive board, the seat he'd been angling for behind the scenes. So he tried to stall national security for a promotion. I sat there, in a room lined with encrypted screens and national flags, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not anger, disappointment, cold and sharp, the kind that doesn't shout. It cuts. Because this wasn't just about career sabotage. This was sabotage of the country, of people who trusted me to keep them safe, of a project designed to outpace enemies we couldn't even see. And now I had a decision to make, not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as a commander. By protocol, I had to escalate, recommend a full leadership audit of Nova's internal chain of command. That included Madison. That included my father. I submitted the order within the hour. No hesitation, no apology, no exemptions. Later that night, I flew back to Oregon for a classified sit-down with the Internal Security Review Board. Word had already reached the company's top floor. When I arrived at Nova HQ, tension was thick in the hallways. Smiles were tight. Doors didn't close all the way behind me. I walked into the conference room like I belonged there, because I did. Madison was already seated at the far end. No makeup, no camera-ready smile, just the wide-eyed panic of someone who thought she'd never have to answer for anything. My father stood as I entered. "Isabella, Commander," he corrected stiffly. "This can't be right. There's been some mistake." "No," I said calmly. "There hasn't." I laid out the documents, printed, highlighted, signed by me. Every timestamp, every access log, every memo trail. I spoke in bullet points. I didn't let it get personal, because the truth didn't need emotion. It needed clarity. You delayed approval, I said to my father. You knew it would compromise our response timeline. I was protecting my team, he said quickly. No, I replied. You were protecting your seat at the boardroom table. I turned to Madison. You leaked internal memos to manipulate public perception of a defense initiative. That is espionage-level behavior. Her voice cracked. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't hurt me, I cut in. You jeopardized the project. You made us vulnerable. And you did it for attention. That's not ambition, Madison. That's recklessness. Silence. The board quietly nodded. The process was now official. The audit would proceed. And I'd done what needed to be done. Not because I wanted to, but because that's what leaders do. As I stood to leave, my father finally spoke again. I can't believe you'd do this to your own family. I turned back to him. I didn't do this to my family, I said. I did this in spite of them. And I meant it. You see, family should be the people who lift you, who protect you, who challenge you without undermining you. But when they choose ego over honor, ambition over integrity, that's not family. That's a threat, and I neutralize threats. The next day, Cornova released a statement announcing an internal leadership audit to ensure compliance, accountability, and alignment with federal security protocols. They didn't name names, but the message was loud and clear. I walked back into my base later that week and resumed my post. No drama, no interviews, just the work, just the mission, because I didn't need revenge. I didn't need approval. I had something better. I had truth. And for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of who I used to be. I was exactly who I'd fought to become. They requested the meeting. Not the board. Not my team. My family. A private room. No lawyers. No rank. Just bloodlines and bruised egos. I walked in wearing my uniform. Not out of pride, but because the truth doesn't need to dress down. It just needs to be heard. My father was already seated, hands folded like this was just another corporate negotiation. Madison stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes flicking between me and the floor like she hadn't decided which one deserved more blame. And my mother? Silent. Present only because appearances still mattered. I took the seat opposite them. Let the quiet settle. Let them sit in it. Then I started. You taught me to stand tall, I said, voice level. But only when it suited your plans. Only when it matched the future you'd already mapped out for me. They didn't interrupt. Not yet. I stood on my own, I continued. I built something outside your system. I didn't wait for your approval. And now you resent that I didn't need your blueprint. My father sighed. Isabella. No, I said, firm. You told the board to delay the project. You gambled with national security so you could climb one more rung. And you did it knowing exactly what this initiative means to our defense strategy. He looked down. For the first time in a long time, the fire wasn't there. Only flickers of shame wrapped in justification. It wasn't personal, he said. That made me laugh, cold and short. Of course it was. Everything's personal when your ego's involved. I believed the timing was premature, he pressed. We weren't ready for that level of military oversight. You weren't ready, I corrected. You weren't ready to be seen for what you really are, someone who built a name on control, not contribution. That landed hard. He flinched. Then Madison stepped forward, her voice soft, a little raw. I didn't think it would explode like this. The leak was supposed to start a conversation, not all this. I looked at her. You weaponized trust, I said. That wasn't a conversation. That was sabotage. Her lips tightened. You don't know what it's like to live in your shadow, to be second best in a room where I used to lead. I stood. Madison, you've been handed every spotlight. You stood in it like it belonged to you by birthright. I earned mine, inch by inch, in silence, in war rooms you'll never see. She looked away, and I let her. Because sometimes silence is the only mirror strong enough to reflect the truth. I turned to my mother. She didn't speak, just gave me that same expression I've seen since childhood, neutral, unreadable, like emotions were something fragile women indulged in behind closed doors. I finally said the thing none of us had dared speak aloud. You didn't want me to succeed. You wanted me to comply. No one argued, because deep down, they knew. I took one final breath and ended it. I don't need apologies, I said. I'm not here for reconciliation. I'm here to say this. The next time you think about moving pieces behind my back, remember that I don't play games. I command missions. Then I left. No door slams, no dramatic exits, just clarity, cold, clean, permanent. Later that night, back at the command suite, Ethan Marlowe knocked gently before stepping inside. He didn't ask about the meeting. He didn't need to. He just sat across from me, unbuttoned his collar, and said, "That took guts." I nodded. "Not really. Just overdue." He studied me for a moment like he was weighing something heavier than words. "You know," he said, "we've had contractors back out of defense deals over less. Internal pressure, politics, family drama, most people bend." "I don't bend," I said quietly. "That's why you're here," he replied. "Loyalty to the mission over family politics, that's what makes you invaluable." I let that sink in. Not because I needed the praise, but because for the first time in my life, someone in power finally said what I already knew to be true. Not just that I belonged in the room, but that the room needed me. Outside, the lights of the city glowed in cold clusters. Washington didn't sleep. Neither did the enemies we prepared for. And neither would I. Not until the mission was secure. Family had been my first battlefield. But the uniform? That was mine. It didn't hide me. It revealed me. And now, with every protocol I signed, every firewall I approved, every threat I neutralized, I wasn't just serving my country. I was defining who I was outside their shadow. No more asking to be seen. No more waiting to be invited to their table. I had my own. And from here on out, they'd have to knock to enter. It's strange how silence can say more than any speech, especially when it comes from someone who never really saw you, until now. It had been months since the audit, since everything broke open. My father announced his early retirement in a press release that read like it had been drafted years ago, polished, impersonal, and full of phrases like transitioning with grace and focused on family. But I knew the truth. He didn't step down because he was tired. He stepped down because the system no longer bent for him. Cornova's board had quietly closed the door he'd spent decades prying open. His legacy wasn't erased, but it was no longer unchallenged. As for Madison, her fall came quieter. After the leak investigation concluded, she was removed from her team lead position and reassigned to internal communications. No press, no statement, just a reshuffle, a quiet demotion that said everything she didn't want to hear. We hadn't spoken since the confrontation, not out of spite, just necessity. Some fractures don't heal in public. Some things need to break so they never twist again. Meanwhile, I kept moving forward. The Quantum Defense Initiative passed its next security milestone. I spent most of my days behind reinforced doors and classified briefings. Nights were for strategy, for designing tools that kept the digital war from turning real. Then came the awards ceremony, not the flashy kind. This wasn't about ribbons and flags. It was a Pentagon commendation, an internal acknowledgement of contribution and command. Just a room full of people who understood what the stakes really were. My name was called. "Commander Isabella Green," the announcer said, "for distinguished leadership in operational cyber integrity and critical asset protection under the Quantum Defense Initiative." I walked to the stage, spine straight, shoes hitting the floor like punctuation marks. I accepted the plaque without much ceremony. I didn't smile for the cameras. There weren't any. But I did glance up, and that's when I saw her. In the last row of the room, quiet, still. My mother, not in pearls, not in one of her sculpted outfits, just a plain gray coat, hands folded in her lap, eyes shining, but not from pride, from something deeper, older, maybe even regret. I held her gaze for a second, maybe two. She didn't wave. I didn't nod, but there it was. Not forgiveness, not an apology, just understanding. She saw me now. Not the girl who didn't follow the plan. Not the daughter who disappeared into the military because she couldn't handle the corporate world. She saw the woman who walked into fire and walked out with something worth more than applause. After the ceremony, a few officers shook my hand. The usual words were exchanged: honor, service, mission, integrity. But I kept thinking about that moment in the back row. And it hit me, why I came back in the first place. I didn't return for revenge. I didn't return to win arguments, or to prove anything, or to humiliate the people who doubted me. I came back because I had outgrown the version of myself they thought they knew. The truth is, I didn't need them to call me commander. But it sure felt good when they finally did, because titles don't define worth. They don't fix scars. They don't replace love that should have been unconditional. But sometimes a title is more than a rank. It's a declaration that I made it, that I didn't bend, that I didn't let their silence become my ceiling, that I built something they couldn't take credit for. And maybe that's why my mother came that day, not for validation, but because some part of her, maybe the smallest part, knew she'd been wrong, knew I'd never ask for her approval, but still deserved it. When I walked out of that room, into the sharp spring light and the quiet hum of security gates, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from having the last word. The kind that comes from never needing it in the first place. Some stories don't end with dramatic reunions. Some wounds don't get neat stitches. But you don't need perfection to find power. Sometimes all it takes is one silent look across a crowded room, and the knowledge that you never needed permission to become who you are. That's enough. That's everything.